If I'm going to have to tell the story, then I'm going to have to start at the very beginning.
She was one of the most infamous criminals in American history. Even 75 years after her death, her story still stands as the most diabolical crime ever committed. Buckle up for the incredible true story of Georgia Tann like you've never heard it before. Our story begins in 1891 in the small town of Philadelphia, Mississippi, nestled among the dusty roads and chicken farms. It's here where a baby girl named Beulah Georgia Tann was born. Her parents affectionately called her Georgia, and from the outside, Georgia's life looked picture perfect. Her father had been a successful lawyer and was now a prominent judge. He was a strict man with a commanding presence and a reputation for order and discipline. Her mother came from a wealthy Southern family, and together they raised their daughter with the finest education, Southern manners, and expectations that money could buy. Georgia began studying classical music and even took weekly piano lessons where she learned of the great masters Debussy, Beethoven, and Mozart. Her father dreamed of his little girl becoming a concert pianist, someone highly respected and refined who would be sought after by wealthy men. No, she would be a picture-perfect wife, groomed for a picture-perfect future. After all, what other options were there? You see, in those days, it was rare and even frowned upon for a woman to work outside of the home, much less have a career of her own. But Georgia was no ordinary child. She was sharp as a blade, with eyes as cold as steel, and she had no interest in fitting the mold of a traditional Southern belle. The Tann household was one of appearance, not affection. It was a place where love was earned and not given. And Georgia quickly learned how to manipulate, how to lie with a smile, and how to present the perfect face to the world, all while hiding the darkness that was stirring within her. By 1909, Georgia was a teenager and still following the path her father had laid out for her, and soon she enrolled in the Martha Washington College in the mountains of Virginia, where she continued her study of piano, and 4 years later, she had earned a degree in music, which was the kind of achievement that most young women of that era would have hanged their future on. And now that her formal education was over, it was time, they said, for Georgia to settle down, get married, and even raise a family. No, but she had other ideas. Over the next 2 summers, she attended classes in New York, where she began studying law and social justice. And with her father's help, she took and passed the Mississippi bar exam, becoming licensed to practice law. But her father, he wouldn't hear of it. The law, he told her, was no place for a woman. And after a bitter compromise, Georgia gave up on her legal ambitions and took one of the jobs that were considered respectable for a woman in the 1910s, and that was social work. And there it was, in the shadows of orphanages, that Georgia Tann would soon find her true calling. Fresh out of college and barred by her father from practicing law, Georgia Tann reluctantly accepted a position in the world of social work, and by 1922, she was hired by the Mississippi Children's Home Society, a private agency in the state capital that placed orphan and abandoned children with adoptive families all across the state. At first glance, Georgia was an ideal hire. She was educated, confident, and carried herself with a sense of authority. That was uncommon among women in the field at that time. Her job was to find suitable homes for kids, but Georgia had her own ideas about what suitable meant. Now you have to keep in mind, that in the 1920s, the entire child adoption system was woefully unregulated. There were no comprehensive federal adoption laws, and most states only had a handful of minimal guidelines, if any at all. And worst of all, this patchwork of policies was rarely enforced, and often it was left entirely in the hands of private organizations like the Mississippi Children's Home Society. And that meant that child placement decisions were often based more on opinion than on oversight. And with no one looking over their shoulder, orphanages and social workers created their own rules, deciding which families were fit and which children were available. And often that happened in backroom deals. There were no background checks, no home inspections, no legal protections for biological parents, and no system of follow-up after the adoptions were finalized. In this lawless environment, Georgia thrived. She quickly realized that loopholes and silence could be just as powerful as forged signatures. And she took full advantage. With no accountability and few questions being asked, she began to experiment, bending the system to match her vision of what she believed a child's life should look like. Yet, before long, her supervisors began to take notice that children were being placed with families who hadn't been screened, and the paperwork was just missing. So, in 1924, just 2 years after they hired her, Georgia was quietly fired from the Mississippi Children's Home Society for what officials diplomatically labeled mismanagement and questionable practices. However, no formal charges were filed against her, and no warnings were issued to other states or organizations. But Georgia had learned from her mistakes, and next time, no, she wouldn't get caught. And with that in mind, she headed north and crossed over the state line into Tennessee, where she was about to unleash a scandal so unthinkable that it still sends shivers into parents' souls nearly a century later.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling. 4 books for the young and old alike that will make your heart smile. Click the link below to order your copy of the Appalachian Storyteller today.
From the moment Georgia Tann arrived in Memphis, Tennessee, she started rubbing elbows with the political elite. Now, the man who ruled Tennessee politics was E.H. Crump, a man so powerful that he controlled the city of Memphis for a half-century. And like Georgia, Mr. Crump had been born in Mississippi, and he and Georgia became fast friends. She relied on her southern charm and wit while she performed Beethoven's sonatas at the most prestigious parties, where she quickly built a network of connections with powerful politicians and judges who ran the city. With her stellar education and previous experience, Georgia was hired by the Tennessee Children's Home Society in 1924 as a social worker, where she quickly rose up the ranks in the organization with her efficient work ethic. And within a short span of time, Georgia was named the Tennessee Children's Home Executive Director by the Children's Board of Directors. All the pieces were in place, and it was here that Georgia would unleash one of the most diabolical crimes in the annals of American history. You see, adoption agencies were regulated by Tennessee law, which stated that the organizations could only charge a small $7 fee for each adoption that occurred within the state of Tennessee. And here, Georgia saw an opportunity. It was simple. She would seek out wealthy, prospective parents for the children in states like California and New York. And because of privacy laws that allowed social workers to essentially keep no record of the children's biological parents or the adoptive parents, children who came into Georgia's care would simply vanish without a trace. Backed by Crump's political protection, Georgia seized full control of the organization, its budget, its policies, records, and most importantly, its supply of children. But Georgia didn't act alone. She had built a network of corruption that extended through the city government, juvenile courts, hospitals, and even the welfare department. One of her closest allies was Judge Camille Kelly, a motherly figure who, behind the bench, served as a legal rubber stamp for Georgia's every move. And with offices located all across the state, in Memphis and Jackson and Chattanooga and Knoxville, there was a continuous supply of children. With just a nod from Judge Kelly, parental rights were terminated. No hearings or appeals, no records, just a quiet court order, and then a missing child. Social workers, nurses, and doctors, many of them underneath Mr. Crump's thumb, were paid to look the other way, or to feed Georgia the names of vulnerable mothers, poor women, unwed teens, and even women who mysteriously became pregnant while being held as patients in mental hospitals. Georgia labeled all of them unfit and incapable of being mothers. Their babies were taken, many times under false pretenses or forged paperwork, and then they were funneled into a lucrative adoption operation that stretched across the United States. To better understand this, I traveled to Bolivar, Tennessee, to visit one of the most notorious insane asylums in the state, where Georgia Tann stole countless babies.
One of the most sinister ways that Georgia Tann used to obtain her babies was to take them from women who were either pregnant or mysteriously became pregnant while they were patients at mental insane asylums, such as this one behind me here in Bolivar, Tennessee, known as Western Insane Asylum. Here, the scene of babies being taken from their mothers played out thousands of times over the course of decades. Many babies were taken and given to the rich and famous. One such baby that was taken here was born as Fred Phillips and then sold on the black market. Perhaps you know him better today as wrestling legend, the Nature Boy, Ric Flair.
Georgia's plan was brilliant. Find a wealthy out-of-state buyer for the children and charge $1,000 to $10,000 for the adoption fee. Then just pay the $7 fee to the Tennessee Children's Home and pocket the rest of the money. Astonishingly, Georgia Tann ran the largest black market adoption ring in American history from 1925 to 1950. And during that time, she amassed a fortune, which allowed her to drive the finest brand new cars and purchase several vacation homes. Babies that were stolen by Georgia were adopted by some of the most famous people in America. Actress Joan Crawford adopted blonde-haired twins. Hollywood stars June Allison, Lena Turner, Dick Power, and writer Pearl S. Buck, and even New York Governor Herbert Lehman all adopted babies that were under her care. And astonishingly, Georgia Tann even ran ads in newspapers where she raffled off babies. For $25 a ticket, you could enter to win your very own baby. Georgia Tann was now running the largest adoption home in America, and she even went on lecture circuits that were attended by some of America's most influential people, such as President Harry Truman and Eleanor Roosevelt. Yet, no one knew the darkest secret that was really happening at Tennessee Children's Home and what they were really hiding. And I'll tell you right now, it's sickening. Georgia Tann was a woman with no soul, and she only wanted attractive babies. If she thought that a baby was too weak or unsellable, the baby would somehow disappear or mysteriously perish. And strangely, by the 1930s, the Tennessee Children's Home Society had the highest infant mortality rate in the United States. At first, Georgia began burying them in the backyard of the children's home and even hired a local funeral home to secretly cremate the bodies. And while Georgia had arranged for over 5,000 illegal adoptions, the horrible truth is that no one knows exactly how many children met their demise while under her care. To find out more about these missing children, I traveled to Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis. Oh, you can still feel it in the air. The place where the Tennessee's Children Home once stood on Poplar Avenue is now gone. The buildings were torn down years ago, and in their place, modern homes and sidewalks have covered up the truth. But if you know where to look, the ghosts are still there. And I traveled here to see it for myself, to walk those same streets that Georgia walked, and to stand on the very ground where thousands of children were taken from their mothers, some never seen again. The public records building downtown still holds adoption files that have been redacted and sealed, and it's like staring into a black hole. I spoke with local historians, and then I visited Elmwood Cemetery, where I wasn't prepared for what I would see next.
As the mysterious deaths of the children began to mount, Georgia Tann needed a place to put the children's bodies. At first, she buried them on the grounds of the Tennessee's Children Home, but she soon ran out of room. So, in 1923, she worked out a deal with a local funeral home to cremate the babies' bodies. But there were times when a baby would die publicly and people knew about it, and so she needed to bury the bodies. So she bought a 14 by 13 foot plot in Memphis, Tennessee, in the Elmwood Cemetery, where she buried 19 children here over the next several years. None of their graves were marked, no headstones, nothing, and they were completely forgotten about until 2015, when the cemetery raised $13,000 to erect this monument in their memory. This is the only thing here that serves as a reminder to the 19 children that are buried here and the countless unknown children whose bodies we may never know where they are.
By 1950, Georgia Tann had been running her black market baby adoption ring for over 25 years. From her polished office in Memphis, she presented herself as a woman of compassion and a pioneer in modern adoption. But behind the scenes, babies were being stolen and families torn apart, all under the banner of child welfare. But the lies couldn't go on forever. It all began when the new Tennessee governor, Gordon Browning, a man with no political allegiance to the Memphis boss, E.H. Crump, took office with a promise to clean up all the corruption. And almost immediately, whispers of misconduct within the Tennessee Children's Home Society reached his desk. The stories were impossible to ignore. Children taken from hospitals without consent, mothers being told that their babies had died, only to learn years later that the child had been illegally adopted out, and adoptive parents paying thousands of dollars under the table with no legal trail to follow. Browning launched an all-out investigation, and what they found was staggering. All the adoption files were missing, altered, or destroyed, with no signatures and no traceable information at all. But slowly, more stories surfaced, and a horrifying pattern emerged. Over 5,000 children had been placed in Georgia's operation. Many were stolen outright from hospitals, from maternity wards, and from desperate or unwed mothers who were lied to or forced to give up their babies. And some of the babies had died under suspicious circumstances, with no autopsies and no death certificates ever filed. And then they were buried in mass graves. On September 12, 1950, the Tennessee government released a scathing 88-page report that detailed the widespread criminal activity occurring in the Tennessee's Children Home Society, and specifically named Georgia Tann as the architect of the massive illegal adoption scheme. The report estimated that Georgia had made over $1 million, nearly $14 million in today's money, as profit. Newspapers across the country began to run horrific headlines. But Georgia Tann she would never stand trial. And even today, there are many survivors of this unbelievable crime. And to get a better idea, to see things through their eyes, let's take a moment and listen to one survivor's story.
Well, I was born on February the 29th, 1948. My mother told my siblings that she was going to Paris, Tennessee, from McKenzie, Tennessee, which was her home, to have a tumor removed from her abdomen. Unbeknownst to my family, it was me. It wasn't a tumor. I was born by cesarean section. Turns out the reason she snuck off was that who she claimed to be my father had died 18 months prior to my birth. So it was, for a widow woman to go home with a new baby would have been unheard of back in the 40s. She was protecting herself more than anything else, because from all indications, our mother was not a kind person either. I found out because our mother had given Georgia Tann and her people false information about our last name. But the rumor that was going around town that my siblings had heard, that our mother was going to Paris, Tennessee to have an abortion. I was picked up in Paris, Tennessee from McSwain's clinic on March the 1st, 1948, and brought to Memphis. But on the release papers and everything, it just said that she was already on relief, which is welfare in our sense now, that she could not take care of another child. Well, she couldn't have, because she still had 6 at home that she was dealing with. My siblings said that our mother did the biggest favor she could ever done for me. Said she not only couldn't take care of you, because she never took care of us. I don't harbor any anger towards my mother at all for what she did, because I was adopted when I was 8 days old in Memphis. As it turned out, it was probably not a normal adoption. It just appeared that it was. I'm sure that my mom and dad always told me that I was adopted, and that my uncle had a whole lot to do with it. I'm assuming that my uncle's the one that footed the bill, because he was well off. There seemed to be a pattern of charging excessive fees for adoptions. I've heard as much as 70 to 200 times more than what a normal adoption would be. It seems like the standard fee was about $1,000. In 1948, that was worth about $20,000 in today's money. People have been known to pay as much as $10,000 for a child through Georgia Tann. No telling what he paid to have this adoption go through, but I was one of the lucky ones. I was adoptable. My parents were called, told they had a choice of a little boy or a little girl. They had 2 children that they wanted them to come look at, and they were to make their choice. Fortunately, for me, made a choice for me. They wanted a little boy. There's letters between my parents and the Tennessee Children's Home Society for about a year. I remember in 1950 and this turns out after Georgia Tann had passed away. Gordon Browning had gotten the governor of Tennessee at that time, had requested an investigation on Georgia Tann, and 3 days after that was delivered to him, Georgia Tann mysteriously died of uterine cancer. How poetic justice could that be? There's some theories about that it seems awfully strange that she would die just 3 days after that, knowing that she was going to spend the rest of her life in prison.
Mysteriously, just 3 days before the report was to become public and she was to be arrested, Georgia Tann died. The official cause of death was cancer, but many folks, they don't believe it. Instead, she took to the grave with her the names of all the missing children, all the forged records, and the full scope of her criminal empire. And as for those politicians and the judges and the wealthy elite who helped her pull off these horrible crimes, astonishingly, no one was ever punished. Wow. What about you, my friend? What do you think? Are there others who should have been prosecuted besides Georgia Tann? And why is it that the records of the entire investigation have now been permanently sealed and all the names involved have been redacted? Is it possible that Georgia Tann was merely a pawn, and that there might have been someone incredibly wealthy and powerful who walked away? Will we ever truly know? I look forward to your comments below. And finally, my friend, I leave you with this. If you enjoy true stories like this that are presented on this channel, please click the subscribe button and share these videos out. Did you know that this channel is watched by over 2 million people a month from all around the world? Yet, 60% of them aren't subscribed. This simple act helps this channel more than you can ever imagine. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next story.